What's the difference between co-parenting with someone and parallel parenting with them?
Great question. Hey guys, I'm Rebecca and this is Davy and we host the Divorce Hub.
Howdy.
Hi. This is a big question that we get a lot of times, and we've experimented both ways at different times in our personal divorces with co-parenting each of these ways. And I think it's something that gets thrown around, especially in high conflict divorces. When you can't get along with somebody, it's great. We'll put up the walls and we'll parallel parent. But tonight we're going to dig into really what is the difference in the two parenting strategies? Is one better than the other? Yeah, let's jump in.
I think these are two terminologies that people weaponize quite a bit in the process of trying to figure out what you are. One of the things we said in preparation for this content was to talk really specifically about the definitions of these things. Mm-hmm. One of the easiest things that I see people name incorrectly or get wrong is they think just because they're being nice to someone, that means you're actually co-parenting with them. We see this discussion. Oh, how's your ex? How's that relationship? Oh, we're very nice. We're doing great at co-parenting. Co-parenting is a whole different specific set of energy than just trading kids on switch days.
And the opposite can be true too, which we've seen with some of our good friends. I'm just thinking of them now, where they are like awful to each other and you can feel the tension in the room. But I know for a fact they tote those kids back and forth to practices and games, and they are so on the same page with co-parenting. They really just hate each other.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a spectrum of how much you are co-parented versus parallel parented, but these are definitely somewhere in between. Like, for example, we talked about a group that we saw recently. And while they are co-parenting in the general sense, there are parallel parenting elements to their co-parenting arrangement. The flip side of that, though, is if you're parallel parenting, and this is what you'll see as we talk through this, that's almost virtually and sometimes no contact whatsoever with your ex, parenting or otherwise.
I think we go ahead and define what the two are, and I'm going to read the definition here. So co-parenting is where the two parents actively collaborate together. You are still collaborating while you're raising the kids. The only difference is you're not in love, you're not living in the same house, you're not sleeping together, but you are still parenting the kids together.
I think that's an important distinction we're going to say over and over is there's difference between how you interact when you talk to that person versus are you co-parenting and making joint decisions together. Mm-hmm. So if you're not, then you're probably parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is designed for high conflict situations. You're probably in this state because of a safety concern, communication concern, or you two really just can't get along. I will say this is the worst for the kids. This is the worst case scenario. This is what's creating tension and pain and anger in the kids' lives as they're figuring out, mommy and daddy, they not only got divorced, but they can't even get along for us enough to talk about our soccer games or the dance classes or something like that. This is an awful position to be in, but sometimes from a safety perspective, the only choice that you have. Parallel parenting is defined by this: minimal direct communication, clear and rigid boundaries, whether those are set and agreed to or dictated by a court. 3, decision-making within each home is completely separate. What happens in one house doesn't happen in the other house. There's no communication and no joint decision-making. This could be on things like electronics, morals, or activities, or things like that. There is limited access between households. This may even mean in a parallel parenting situation, there's no communication to your children unless determined to be an emergency. No nightly phone calls, no text messages, no social media. And then last is structured communication. These are parenting apps, emails, or third parties, which includes a lawyer. There are situations and cases out there where because it's so toxic or unsafe for one of the spouses, the only way they communicate is to communicate through attorneys, which is incredibly expensive and difficult when kids have to go to joint activities and things like that. Yeah. In the process of understanding where you're at in your co-parenting journey, there are 3 big differences. These are your first initial litmus tests to figure out, hey, is the communication and the process that I'm going through with my ex, are we co-parenting or are we parallel parenting? And there are 3 main differences. Those are
joint decision-making, access between households, and then the final one is just communication style versus purpose.
Okay, so those 3 again are joint decision-making, access between households, and then communication style. Let's talk first about difference number 1, joint decision-making. When it comes to decision-making about the children, what makes a couple Parallel parents versus what makes a couple co-parents.
Great. So parallel parents, you're making all the decisions together. And those are important things like medical care, education, religious upbringing of the kids. There's discussion and compromise, even if things are tense. There's a mutual respect for the person on the other side who's also raising the kids.
You collaborate still.
It's collaborative.
You come to decisions together, and there are typically parenting plans that even address what happens if you don't agree, either through mediation or therapy. Okay, so that's co-parenting. What does parallel parenting look like when it comes to decisions about the children? What if Johnny wants to play soccer and decides, okay, I know where the tryouts are. We have a 50-50 expense agreement. I want to play soccer. How does that parallel parenting situation work? What if one parent disagrees that the kid should play soccer? What happens? What can that mom do? What can that dad do?
All the time, that's going to be baked out in your divorce decree. If your divorce decree doesn't mention a topic like sports or expenses or how those decisions are made, then your attorney probably messed up, and you've really got to just take it how it is. We have a client we talked with recently. The mom wanted them to play sports. The dad was like, nope, I don't want to. So it was a simple conversation with the coach of, hey, I can get little Johnny to practice on Thursdays, but Tuesdays he's not going to be there. Every other weekend he'll be at the games. Do you still want him on the team? And that's one of those things that you feel like for the kid, it's not fair. It's a really good example of how the children suffer when the parents can't get along. If you've agreed to a co-parenting strategy, and that is the only safe way for an adult to communicate with another adult, then you just have to make the best of a hard situation.
I'll say it again. This parallel parenting thing, where you can't even agree on activities, is terrible for the children. The net result is your kids suffer.
I will say this as somebody who's experienced the parallel parenting side of this, unfortunately, on a personal level, the parent being in a safe, sound state of mind is what's most important. Even more than little Johnny going to soccer practice on Thursdays, having a mommy or a daddy who is like able to function and operate and not be yelled at by a co-parent in front of other soccer families. That's what's most important. Making sure that you as the adult are safe. That's number one. If that means you have to parallel parent either for your mental sanity or your physical sanity, yes, a million times over.
One of the tests for parallel versus co, or co versus parallel, was joint decision making. Difference number two, access between households. What does a co-parenting access sample look like?
Hey, Davy, we forgot the lunchbox. I'm going to drop it on the doorstep before school so my son can have it.
What about calls between children and adults? What do calls and access look like?
I just think that it's agreed to. Communication style is agreed to. We have some clients and friends who their co-parenting relationship is I don't call the kids at all when they're at your house. If they ask to call me, you can facilitate it, but that's like maybe 3 or 4 times a year that the kids want to call and show a new pair of shoes or something. Also, I just think the most important piece is that we agree. So if the child has an iPad that goes back and forth and that's when the child calls is whenever they want, great. But parallel parenting is where the rules are very different in one house or the other.
Yeah, what we find in co-parenting situations is there's a ton of effort and energy to compromise. It transforms the parenting plan that was decided on the day of divorce into a living and breathing document that can be modified and changed. Most of the time, in amenable situations where people are co-parenting, they never have to modify their parenting arrangement.
Right.
Just get along and make compromise and change, sometimes up into the financial arrangements that are set in place as well. So it can happen, but it is rare. Okay, so then we're talking about the difference number two being access in households. What does that access look like in a parallel situation where there's no communication in the co-parenting relationship? Do the kids have access in the other home?
No.
What does that look like?
It looks like becoming really comfortable with the idea that whenever you divorced their parent, you gave up 50% of their life. And so during that 50% of the time, you just lose contact with your kids because somebody is so angry at you. So in a lot of cases, parallel parenting means no access. There's no phone calls, there's no updates, there's no communication. Sometimes even on if they're sick, you might not know if they missed school. If that's not clearly outlined in a parenting plan, you just may not know. And that's one of those things that's been really hard for me to wrap my mind around. It's like, sometimes you feel like there's people in your children's lives that know more about what's going on than you do. The teachers know when they miss school. The counselors know when they miss school. The coaches know when they miss practice. But if the parent is not communicating, you as the parallel co-parent might not know. And that's heartbreaking, but it is one of the byproducts of a parallel parenting relationship.
Yeah, it's really tough. These parallel parent situations are situations where, again, if it's not safety related, there's little to no access, and the degradation into the spirit of the child is really tough. Imagine not being able, not being allowed to have a conversation with one of your parents on any day of your life. It's absurd.
Example that I use with people whenever they're like, I just think we may need to parallel parent. I say, would you ever take your child to grandma's for the weekend and drop them off with no instruction to grandma? No, we would never do that. Even if I'm a super type B parent like myself, they got a suitcase of clothes, they got 4 outfits, we've talked about the weather, what time they're going to bed. So even at a basic level, to co-parent with someone and raise the kid in the best possible environment, because again, at the end of the day, this is all for the children. And to co-parents who are choosing parallel parenting, the question, if they're both sane individuals who can control their emotions, why is that what's best for your kids?
All right. The third difference to define whether or not you're co-parenting or parallel parenting is whether the communication style or the purpose of the communication is defined.
Communication with somebody who you love, who also loves the kids, is open and fluid. And even if it's not friendly, there's a purpose for it and it's clear. And you both have the same purpose in your communication style, which is the health and well-being of raising these children. Communication style and parallel parenting, and even the method to which you communicate, is very structured. It's typically monitored by an app. If the app is not even enough to control the abuse, then it might go strictly through an attorney or a guardian ad litem for the kids. And again, those are not preferred areas, but it is sometimes what has to happen, especially in highly abusive situations or situations that might be dangerous financially for one person or the other. You might need a record, because what everybody knows who's actually been through the court system and the divorce process is if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. You could say anything you wanted to me in the parking lot at school, and if there's not a video recording of it, and if you didn't do it on the app, in a lot of states, text messages and even emails are not admissible in court. So that's why I think a lot of people during the divorce process feel like their communication style is more parallel, simply because they choose that strict, rigid structure to get through the process of separating themselves from the other person.
So to clarify, just because you're being nice to your ex, does that mean you are co-parenting with them?
No.
Can you co-parent with someone and not be nice to them?
Absolutely. I think specifically with the difference in communication is not how you speak to me or how I speak to you. For example, you had a conversation today with your ex who asked for a specific type of communication, and you were like, that's not me, I'm not going to do that to you. But you were co-parenting over coffee, and that's a co-parenting relationship. Even if how your style and my style differ, it's the agreement of what we're doing for the kids.
And the goal in this situation would be to co-parent with respect for each other in communication, especially for the sake of the kids.
I had a high conflict co-parenting therapist explain a system of communication at one point called the BIF method, and that is keeping all communication brief, informative, factual, and fast. And how she explained it to me is you need to be communicating with the person in a parallel parenting agreement or just a high conflict agreement the same way that you would communicate with a distant coworker in a professional manner. You have a same goal, you need to get the information over, but you probably don't need to add emojis and explanations and tell them everything that they ate and what time they went to sleep.
A couple other quick hits that I'm going to mention here.
Okay.
Just quick examples to say, you might be a parallel parent if. It doesn't mean you're completely parallel. These are indications of some parallel parenting happening. 1, use a parenting app and not standard forms of communication. Texts, emails, social media. The communication with the children is restricted to a court-monitored app. The question becomes, if we weren't divorced, how would you communicate with the kids? You would communicate through normal means, phone calls, emails, text messages, social media. So you might be a parallel parent if you're only communicating with your ex and your children through an app. 2, drop-offs at switch day, at events and things like that are silent and quick, and sometimes stoic or angry or mean. Whenever there's a drop-off and the child sees both parents interact completely silently, they're going to pick up on that tension.
You rip the bag out of my hands, or you stay in the car whenever I give the kid
Or
you.
stare downs or mean looks or complete avoidance of eye contact. If you think that your kid doesn't pick up on that, you're really missing the boat. Another one, you don't enter each other's homes. Now, Rebecca and I's personal preference in this one is that's probably one to avoid anyways, because there's a lot of emotional trauma, especially if the house existed in the previous marriage, or there's anxiety from the children, or just bad triggers emotionally. But either way, there's a boundary, there's a restriction, there's not a free flow of people and information.
And again, with access to homes, I think this is one of those things that you're really setting yourself and the kids up for failure if it's not agreed to. If you let me in your home, but I'm not allowed in your, it feels weird for the kids, and it's setting them up to ask questions that they don't need to ask. And so I think consistency on that with co-parenting in the same way it makes sense.
You might be a parallel parent if your decisions are already written into the agreement, and if there's no option, opportunity, arena, or sentiment to modify that. And then if there's a belief that less contact between two people who share children is peace, that's not co-parenting. That's parallel parenting, because that less access for the parents and for the kids is not more peace. It might make one person feel better, but they're weaponizing that contact, which should be free-flowing between parents and people who are co-parenting kids.
That's 100% true. My personal opinion on the information that needs to be shared back and forth is it affects the mental, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being of a child, and you have agreed to co-parent with this person, then it gets shared. And that could be anything from, hey, I'm introducing the kids to a new romantic partner, to grandma's really sick, to, hey, we just got a new dog. One way to think about it, if you're like, should I share this? If they're going to go to school and talk about it with friends, that should be shared in a good co-parenting relationship with the other person, again, so that the kid feels some uniformity in their now very split life.
Another good definition of co-parenting is if it's going to emotionally affect the child in any way, any piece of news or update to a family, to a friend, to an activity, to a hobby, if it's going to affect that child's emotion, or it's going to affect some sort of cadence or pattern in the other home, it should be shared.
Now, here's the important thing, and I think that this is something that you really have to learn as you go further down the road. If you share with me that, hey, Rebecca, the kids are meeting my new girlfriend tonight, and either we have or we haven't agreed to in the past that I get to meet her first. Let's say we haven't, and they're meeting my new girlfriend tonight, and I wanted to give you a heads up. We're going to go to dinner, and she's going to come play games. This is where I, as the co-parent in a healthy co-parenting relationship, say, thanks for that information. I don't get to ask what she looks like. I don't get to ask if those things are not part of the agreement that we have or that you even have to share. Again, did it go to school and be told that way? They probably said, I met my dad's new girlfriend, but they didn't say she grew up in this city and she has 4 siblings. And there's some personal details there that maybe aren't mine to know unless you want to offer them.
Okay, so again, to bring us back, I think it's important to understand that it's pretty tough to be completely one or the other, completely co-parented or completely parallel. There's nuance in this entire arrangement. At the beginning, I shared earlier that we have a friend of ours that we know really well that has a good working relationship with her ex, but they have elements of that co-parenting energy which are clearly parallel. One element is, I don't call my kids when they're with my ex. And that's limited access to the other home, to the children, but they have a functional relationship. So I think the point that I want to say here, everybody has to come together and agree to agree or agree to disagree and go parallel. So I think there's an importance to understand that there's a lot of mix in this stuff. But I think the goal, the more you can trend towards that spectrum of co-parenting, the better off your children are going to benefit from you collaborating on messages being the same, snacks being the same, and the information being the same as well.
One of the worst things you can do in a relationship when you're co-parenting is if they raise the flag and say, hey, parallel parenting over here on the access in my home. You don't get to call the kids, and that's a thing, and that's what I'm doing. One of the worst things in a co-parenting relationship is, all right, fine, if I don't get access to the kids at your house, then you don't get whatever. And parents start to bicker and fight in that way. And while it feels like that might be a way that you're protecting the kids and fighting for them, one of the worst things you can do is degrade areas of a parenting plan where you are co-parenting for one area that's off the table right now.
Yeah, and I'll just close with a thought that I'll share, that the best parenting structure is the one that creates the least amount of conflict for the child, period. Right. And when you create a co-parenting relationship, whether that's based on the document that was signed the day you got divorced, or it's something that you're working on through therapy or conversations, your number one goal, now that you no longer live together, is what strategy can we employ in the business of our children that creates the least amount of conflict for them and for us? And that's how to be a co-parent.
How to be a co-parent.